Your mother already changed the wedding vendors, Olivia Parker said quietly over the phone, her voice careful in the way people speak when they know something has gone terribly wrong. Emily Carter didn't answer right away. She stood in the middle of her kitchen, the early afternoon sunlight spilling across the marble counter she had spent 3 years saving for after moving into the small townhouse in Maplewood, New Jersey. On the table in front of her sat a neatly organized binder labeled wedding plans, each tab color-coded in soft pastel shades: flowers, venue, catering, music, photography. For the past 8 months, that binder had been the center of her world. Emily finally asked the only question that mattered. What do you mean she changed them? On the other end of the line, Olivia hesitated. Emily could almost picture her sitting at the wide oak desk inside the bridal planning studio downtown, flipping nervously through emails and contracts. Someone called the florist yesterday afternoon, Olivia explained. They said they were the mother of the bride and that the original order needed to be cancelled. They also contacted the catering company this morning and requested a completely different menu. Emily looked down slowly at the open binder. The page in front of her showed a delicate watercolor sketch of white peonies and pale blush roses arranged across long reception tables beneath warm string lights. It had taken her weeks to finalize that design. Did they say her name? Emily asked calmly. Olivia didn't need to answer. Diane Carter, she said after a moment. The name hung in the air like a quiet confirmation of something Emily had been trying not to notice for years. Emily walked to the window and looked out over the quiet suburban street. A mail truck rolled slowly past the row of identical townhouses. Somewhere down the block a dog barked twice and then stopped. The world outside felt completely ordinary. Inside her kitchen, however, something had shifted. There's more, Olivia added softly. She also called the venue manager this morning. She tried to move the ceremony location. Emily closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. The reaction Olivia expected never came. There was no raised voice, no sharp breath, no anger. Instead, Emily simply asked, "Did the vendors confirm the changes?" "Not yet," Olivia said. "They wanted to check with you first." Emily turned a page. In the binder slowly, her fingers resting on the printed timeline for the wedding day scheduled just 12 days away. Ceremony at 4:30 p.m. Cocktail hour at 5 o'clock. Dinner reception at 6 o'clock. A first dance she and Daniel had practiced in their living room every evening for 2 weeks straight. All of it had been planned with quiet, careful intention. "Okay," Emily said. Olivia blinked in confusion on the other end of the line. "Okay?" "Yes," Emily repeated gently. "For now, just let everything stay exactly as it is." There was a pause. "Emily, are you sure?" Emily looked again at the binder, then at the sunlight stretching across the counter. Her voice remained steady. "My mother thinks she's planning my wedding," she said. "Let's give her exactly what she thinks she wants." Emily Carter closed the wedding binder slowly after the call ended, leaving it exactly where it was on the kitchen counter, as if nothing unusual had happened. Outside the window the quiet Maplewood street looked the same as it had every morning for the past 3 years since she and Daniel Brooks had moved into the townhouse. A woman across the street was walking a golden retriever along the sidewalk. A delivery truck stopped at the corner. The ordinary rhythm of the neighborhood continued without the slightest hint that the most important day of Emily's life had just been quietly rearranged behind her back. She walked to the refrigerator, poured a glass of cold water, and stood there for a moment thinking about her mother. Diane Carter had always believed that control was a form of love. When Emily was 12 years old, Diane chose her piano lessons, her summer camps, even the clothes she wore to school. When Emily was 18, Diane insisted on touring colleges that Emily had never even considered. When Emily was 25 and accepted her first job in New York City, Diane spent an entire weekend explaining why that decision was impractical. None of it had ever sounded cruel. Diane always spoke with the same calm certainty, as if she was simply correcting a small mistake before it became a bigger one. Emily took a slow sip of water and looked again at the binder on the counter. The wedding had been planned carefully for months. A small ceremony at Willow Creek Garden, a historic venue about 40 minutes outside the city where tall maple trees surrounded a wide open lawn. Emily had chosen it because it felt peaceful and quiet, the kind of place where guests could hear the wind move through the branches during the ceremony. Daniel loved it for the same reason. The reception hall there had tall windows that overlooked a small lake, and in the evening the sunlight turned the water gold. Emily had imagined walking into that room with Daniel beside her while their families and friends filled the long wooden tables decorated with flowers and warm string lights. The vision had been simple, intimate, and entirely theirs. Her phone vibrated softly on the counter. A message from Daniel appeared on the screen. He had been working late shifts all week finishing a construction project outside Newark before the wedding week began. The message read, "How is everything going with the final vendor confirmations today?" Emily stared at the words for a moment before typing back, "Everything is moving exactly as planned." She set the phone down and walked into the living room where several cardboard boxes sat neatly stacked near the wall. Inside them were small wedding favors that she and Daniel had assembled the night before, tiny glass jars filled with local honey from a farm in Pennsylvania about 90 miles away. Each jar had a small tag tied around the lid that read, "Thank you for sharing this sweet day with us." Emily picked up one of the jars and turned it slowly in her hand. Somewhere in the middle of the quiet living room she realized something that felt strangely freeing. Her mother believed she was redesigning the entire wedding without Emily noticing. Diane believed she had stepped in just in time to fix what she considered mistakes. Emily placed the jar back into the box carefully, and looked toward the window where the afternoon light had begun to shift across the floor. If Diane Carter wanted control of the wedding plans, then Emily was willing to let her believe she had it for a little while longer. The following morning arrived with the same quiet rhythm that Maplewood always carried during late spring. Soft sunlight moved slowly across the Carter townhouse living room while Emily Carter sat at the dining table with her laptop open and her wedding binder beside it. She had woken up early, earlier than usual, long before the neighborhood traffic began to build along Springfield Avenue. The house was silent except for the faint sound of coffee dripping into the glass pot in the kitchen. Emily had always found comfort in mornings like this. The calm made it easier to think clearly. Her email inbox was already filling with vendor confirmations from the previous afternoon. The florist had written politely to confirm that someone claiming to be the mother of the bride had requested a completely different floral arrangement. Instead of the soft white peonies Emily had selected months ago, the request described large red roses and tall gold centerpieces that would dramatically change the look of the reception hall. The catering company had also sent a message. Diane Carter had asked to replace the carefully planned seasonal menu with a formal plated dinner that included dishes Emily had never even tasted. The messages continued down the screen like a quiet trail of evidence. Each request carried the same confident signature line, "Diane Carter, mother of the bride." Emily read every message carefully without showing any visible frustration. She simply closed the laptop for a moment, and rested her hands on the table. Across the room the stack of honey jar favors remained exactly where she and Daniel had left them the night before. For a brief moment Emily imagined her mother sitting at home making phone calls with the same calm certainty she had carried her entire life. Diane never believed she was interfering. In her mind she was improving things. That belief had shaped every decision she had ever made for Emily. Her phone vibrated softly again. This time it was Olivia Parker. Emily answered and placed the call on speaker while she continued looking at the quiet room around her. Olivia sounded both concerned and slightly impressed. She explained that Diane had contacted nearly every vendor connected to the wedding. The photographer had received instructions about a new ceremony timeline. The musician scheduled for the ceremony had been asked to replace the piano arrangement Emily selected with a full-string quartet that would require additional space inside the venue garden. Olivia paused for a moment before asking the obvious question. Did Emily want her to stop the changes immediately? Emily leaned back in her chair and glanced at the wedding binder still resting beside her laptop. The tabs labeled venue schedule, ceremony music, and reception decor remained perfectly organized, untouched by the storm of quiet phone calls her mother had been making. Emily took a slow breath before answering. She said that Olivia should thank the vendors for informing her, and that they should politely acknowledge Diane's requests for now. Olivia hesitated, unsure if she understood correctly. Emily's voice remained calm and steady as she explained that sometimes people reveal more about their intentions when they believe no one is paying attention. Olivia listened carefully before agreeing to follow Emily's instructions. When the call ended, Emily sat quietly for another moment, watching the sunlight stretch farther across the wooden floor. 12 days remained until the wedding. 12 days for Diane Carter to continue redesigning an event she believed she had successfully taken over. Emily did not reach for the binder or reopen the laptop. Instead, she simply stood up, walked to the kitchen window, and looked out at the peaceful street while a very different kind of plan began quietly forming in her mind. 2 days passed with the same quiet routine, and to anyone looking from the outside, Emily Carter appeared completely calm. The townhouse in Maplewood remained peaceful, the wedding binder still resting on the dining table exactly where she had left it. But behind that stillness, the pattern of her mother's phone calls continued spreading through every corner of the wedding plans. Late that afternoon, Emily sat on the living room couch with her laptop open again, while a light spring rain tapped gently against the window. Another message from Olivia Parker had arrived only a few minutes earlier. This one came from the venue manager at Willow Creek Garden. The message explained that Diane Carter had called again that morning with a new request. She had asked about rearranging the ceremony seating, extending the guest list, and changing the timing of the reception entrance so that the evening would follow what she described as a more traditional format. Emily read the email slowly, her expression remaining thoughtful rather than upset. She had spent most of her life watching her mother approach every situation with the same quiet confidence. Diane never raised her voice or forced her way into control. Instead, she guided conversations carefully until everyone around her began to believe her version of events made the most sense. Emily remembered one particular afternoon when she was 17 years old, sitting at the kitchen table filling out college applications. She had been excited about studying architecture at a small school in Oregon nearly 3,000 miles away. Diane had listened quietly as Emily explained the program and the campus and the scholarship opportunity. Then Diane calmly described a different university closer to home, one that had stronger connections and a more practical future. By the end of that conversation, Emily had found herself filling out an entirely different application than the one she had originally planned. That was how Diane Carter operated. She did not push people aside. She simply reshaped their decisions until they believed the new direction had always been theirs. Emily closed the laptop and looked around the living room where wedding decorations were beginning to gather on the shelves and tables. A stack of small place cards waited beside the window, each one printed neatly with a guest name. The seating arrangement had taken nearly a full weekend to organize. Now she imagined her mother sitting at her own kitchen table somewhere across town making another careful list of changes. Diane believed she was fixing mistakes. Diane believed she was helping her daughter create a better wedding. The rain outside began to fall a little harder, streaking gently down the glass while the room grew dimmer with the late afternoon clouds. Emily stood and walked toward the hallway where a framed photograph hung on the wall. It showed her and Daniel Brooks standing together at Willow Creek Garden the first time they visited the venue nearly 8 months earlier. Daniel had taken the photo with his phone while they stood beside the lake watching the sunlight reflect across the water. That moment had been simple and honest and entirely theirs. Emily studied the photograph quietly before returning to the living room and picking up her phone. She scrolled through the contact list until she reached Olivia Parker's number again. When Olivia answered, Emily spoke with the same calm tone she had used from the beginning. She asked Olivia to continue documenting every request her mother made and to keep every vendor informed but not to finalize any permanent changes yet. Olivia listened carefully before agreeing. When the call ended, Emily placed the phone on the table and sat back down on the couch. Outside, the rain slowly began to fade, leaving the neighborhood quiet again. Diane Carter believed she was steadily taking control of the wedding one vendor at a time. What she did not realize was that every change she made was quietly revealing exactly how far she was willing to go. 3 days later, the pattern finally revealed something new. Emily Carter was standing in the small coffee shop 2 blocks from her townhouse when Olivia Parker called again, her voice quieter than usual as if she had just uncovered something unexpected. Emily held the warm paper cup between her hands while listening carefully. Olivia explained that one of the venue assistants at Willow Creek Garden had forwarded another email earlier that morning. The message had come from Diane Carter again, but this time the request was different from the earlier changes. Diane was not only adjusting the details of the ceremony and reception anymore. She had asked the venue manager a very specific question about cancellation policies and private event reservations at another location owned by the same company. Emily stepped outside the coffee shop and into the cool morning air, as she asked Olivia to explain exactly what that meant. Olivia read the message again slowly to be sure she had understood it correctly. Diane Carter had been asking about reserving the Grand Hall at Silverbrook Estate, a much larger venue located nearly 25 miles away on the other side of the county. Emily knew the place immediately. Silverbrook Estate was known for large formal weddings with hundreds of guests, high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and long marble hallways. It was the opposite of Willow Creek Garden in almost every possible way. Willow Creek was quiet and natural, surrounded by trees and water. Silverbrook was grand and dramatic, designed for events that felt more like formal galas than intimate celebrations. Emily stood silently on the sidewalk while a car passed slowly along the street behind her. Olivia continued explaining that Diane had asked about transferring deposits, adjusting contracts, and possibly relocating the ceremony if certain arrangements could be confirmed quickly. The request had surprised the venue manager enough that he contacted Olivia directly before making any official changes. Emily closed her eyes for a moment as the pieces of the situation quietly aligned in her mind. Her mother was not simply redesigning the wedding decorations or replacing the menu. Diane Carter was preparing to move the entire event. She was building an entirely new version of the wedding somewhere else without Emily ever agreeing to it. Olivia asked the obvious question again, her voice filled with concern this time. Did Emily want to stop the process before it went any further? Emily watched a pair of cyclists ride past the coffee shop while the early sunlight reflected across the storefront windows. The morning air smelled faintly of rain left over from the previous evening. Her answer came as calmly as it had every other time Olivia had asked. Emily said that the venue manager should respond politely to Diane's questions but should not finalize anything without Emily's confirmation. Olivia hesitated again before agreeing. After the call ended, Emily remained standing there on the sidewalk for several minutes. She imagined Diane sitting somewhere with a pen and a notebook, confidently reorganizing the entire wedding into something larger and more impressive. Diane believed she was correcting her daughter's choices. She believed that when the day finally arrived, everyone would thank her for creating a better celebration. Emily lifted the coffee cup slowly and took a small sip while looking down the quiet street toward her townhouse. For the first time since Olivia's first phone call, the situation felt completely clear. Her mother was not trying to help. Her mother was trying to take ownership of the entire day. And now that Emily understood exactly how far Diane was willing to go, she finally knew what she needed to do next. That evening Emily Carter finally told Daniel Brooks everything. He had just returned from the construction site outside Newark, his work boots leaving faint dust marks near the townhouse entryway as he stepped inside and placed his keys on the small wooden table by the door. The sun was setting behind the row of houses across the street, casting a warm orange glow through the living room windows. Emily was sitting on the couch with the wedding binder open on the coffee table in front of her, but she was not looking at it. She had been waiting for Daniel to come home before speaking about what had been happening over the past week. Daniel noticed the quiet expression on her face almost immediately, and sat down beside her. Emily explained everything slowly and clearly, beginning with Olivia Parker's first phone call about the vendors and continuing through the newest discovery involving the Silverbrook Estate. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful as he tried to understand the full situation. When Emily finished, the room fell silent for a moment except for the soft ticking of the wall clock above the kitchen doorway. Daniel leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees while looking down at the binder on the table. He knew Emily's mother well enough to recognize the pattern she described. Diane Carter had always believed she was improving things for the people around her. Daniel finally looked back at Emily and asked the same question Olivia had asked earlier in the week. Did she want him to call Diane and stop the situation immediately before it went any further? Emily shook her head slowly. Her voice remained calm and steady as she explained that confronting Diane now would only create an argument and force her mother to become defensive. Diane would never admit she was wrong if she felt attacked. Instead, Emily believed the situation had already reached a point where the truth would reveal itself naturally. Daniel studied her expression for a moment before nodding quietly. He trusted Emily's judgment. Over the past few days he had noticed the same calm determination in her voice that appeared whenever she had already decided exactly what needed to happen next. Emily explained that she wanted to allow Diane to continue believing she had successfully taken control of the wedding plans. The vendors were already aware of the situation, and Olivia was documenting every request Diane made. Meanwhile, the original plans for Willow Creek Garden would remain safely in place without Diane realizing it. Daniel leaned back on the couch and let out a slow breath while considering the idea. It was a quiet strategy but a careful one. If Diane continued organizing her own version of the event at Silverbrook Estate, then eventually she would reveal exactly how far she intended to push the situation. Emily reached forward and closed the wedding binder gently before placing it back on the coffee table. Outside, the last light of the evening faded across the neighborhood, while streetlights flickered on along the sidewalk. Emily looked toward the window and spoke with quiet certainty. Her mother believed she was building a perfect wedding behind the scenes, one that would surprise everyone when the day arrived. What Diane Carter did not realize was that she had just given Emily the clearest opportunity she had ever had to show her mother that this wedding would belong to the people actually getting married. The following week unfolded with a strange sense of calm, as if the quiet suburban streets of Maplewood were holding a secret that only Emily Carter understood. From the outside, nothing appeared unusual. Emily continued going to work each morning. Daniel Brooks continued finishing his final construction shifts before taking time off for the wedding, and the townhouse remained filled with the same neatly stacked wedding boxes and carefully labeled decorations. Yet behind that ordinary routine, Diane Carter's version of the wedding continued growing larger with every passing day. Olivia Parker called Emily several times throughout the week with updates. Diane had confirmed a provisional hold on the Grand Hall at Silverbrook Estate. She had asked about additional seating capacity and requested estimates for upgraded lighting and a larger band for the reception. The florist received instructions for towering arrangements of red roses that would reach nearly 3 feet above each table. The catering manager at Silverbrook had also been contacted about a formal plated dinner that included multiple courses and a champagne welcome service for arriving guests. Each new detail painted a clearer picture of what Diane believed the wedding should be. Emily listened carefully to every update Olivia shared, occasionally asking small questions but never raising her voice or showing any frustration. Instead, she continued asking Olivia to document every message and quietly inform the vendors that no official contracts should be finalized until Emily personally approved them. One afternoon, Olivia met Emily at the Willow Creek Garden venue to walk through the original ceremony layout again. The sky was bright and clear, and the lake beside the ceremony lawn reflected the tall maple trees that gave the place its name. Olivia stood with a clipboard in her hands while Emily walked slowly along the wooden aisle path where the ceremony chairs would eventually be arranged. Olivia finally asked the question she had been holding back all week. She wondered how Emily could remain so calm knowing that her mother was building an entirely different wedding only 25 miles away. Emily stopped near the edge of the lake and watched the water ripple gently in the breeze. She explained that Diane Carter had spent most of her life believing that control meant protection. In Diane's mind, she was rescuing her daughter from what she considered small mistakes or poor decisions. The problem was that Diane had never noticed when Emily stopped needing to be rescued. Olivia listened quietly as Emily continued walking toward the reception hall. The large windows of the building reflected the afternoon sunlight across the water exactly the way they had during Emily's first visit with Daniel months earlier. Emily finally turned back toward Olivia with a small, thoughtful smile. She said that sometimes the only way to change a pattern that had existed for decades was to allow it to reach its natural conclusion. Diane believed she was preparing the perfect surprise for her daughter's wedding day. What Diane Carter did not realize was that when that day finally arrived, she would be walking into a situation she had completely misunderstood. The final week before the wedding arrived quietly, carrying the warm early summer air that settled over Maplewood in late June. Emily Carter woke up before sunrise that Monday morning and stood for a moment in the kitchen of the townhouse, watching the pale light begin to spread across the quiet street outside. The neighborhood was still asleep, and the only sound was the distant hum of a delivery truck moving slowly along the main road several blocks away. On the dining table the wedding binder remained exactly where it had been for months, its pastel tabs marking the careful plans Emily and Daniel Brooks had built together. Across town, however, another set of plans had been growing steadily stronger. Olivia Parker called shortly after 8 in the morning with another update, her voice calm but carrying a hint of disbelief at the scale of what Diane Carter had been arranging. Diane had spent the weekend confirming the reservation at Silverbrook Estate. She had approved the large floral installations and finalized a formal dining menu that included several dishes the venue specialized in preparing for high-profile weddings. She had also spoken with a live band that normally performed at large ballroom events, requesting a performance schedule that would last nearly 4 hours during the reception. Emily listened carefully while standing beside the kitchen counter, occasionally asking Olivia to repeat certain details so she could picture exactly what her mother believed she was building. Diane Carter had not simply been adjusting a few small details anymore. She had been constructing an entirely different celebration, one designed to impress guests and create the kind of grand moment she believed her daughter deserved. Olivia eventually asked whether Emily planned to inform the guests about the possible venue change. Emily answered that question gently but firmly. She explained that every guest invitation had already been mailed months earlier with the correct ceremony location printed clearly on the card. Friends and relatives from several states had already confirmed their travel arrangements to attend the wedding at Willow Creek Garden. Emily thanked Olivia for continuing to document everything and reminded her again not to finalize any of Diane's contracts without direct confirmation. After the call ended, Emily poured herself a cup of coffee and sat quietly at the table while the morning sunlight grew stronger through the window. Daniel entered the kitchen a few minutes later, still adjusting the sleeve of his work shirt before leaving for his final day at the construction site. Emily shared Olivia's newest update with him, while the coffee machine clicked softly beside them. Daniel listened and shook his head slowly, amazed at how confidently Diane seemed to believe she was orchestrating the entire event. Emily closed the wedding binder and looked across the kitchen toward the window where the street had begun to fill with early commuters. The wedding day was now only 4 days away. Diane Carter believed she had successfully taken control of the most important moment in her daughter's life. What she did not understand was that every change she made had been quietly preparing the exact moment when the truth would become impossible to ignore. The morning of the wedding arrived with clear skies stretching across the quiet fields surrounding Willow Creek Garden. Emily Carter stood beside the tall window of the bridal preparation room, watching the early sunlight move slowly across the lake outside. The water reflected the pale blue sky in long shimmering lines while a light breeze moved gently through the maple trees that circled the ceremony lawn. Inside the room the atmosphere was calm and focused. Olivia Parker moved carefully between tables covered with makeup brushes, hairpins, and neatly arranged garment bags while the florist placed the final arrangements of white peonies along the wooden reception tables. Everything looked exactly the way Emily had imagined it nearly a year earlier when she and Daniel Brooks first visited the venue together. A quiet knock sounded on the door before Olivia stepped inside holding her phone in one hand. She explained that guests had already begun arriving through the front entrance of the garden property. Cars filled the gravel parking area and several family members were walking along the stone path toward the ceremony lawn. Emily nodded softly and glanced toward the mirror where her wedding dress hung waiting beside the window. At the same moment, nearly 25 miles away, another building was also beginning to prepare for an event that would never happen. Diane Carter stepped out of her car at Silverbrook Estate wearing a carefully chosen navy dress and carrying a leather folder filled with printed schedules. The grand building rose above the manicured lawns exactly as she remembered from her earlier visit that week. Tall white columns framed the entrance, and the wide marble staircase led toward the enormous ballroom she had spent days arranging. Diane walked confidently through the front doors, expecting to see staff members setting tables and musicians preparing instruments for the ceremony she believed would soon take place. Instead, she found the lobby completely quiet. The polished floors reflected the morning light from the tall windows, and the large chandelier above the entry hall hung perfectly still. A single receptionist looked up from the front desk with a polite but confused expression. Diane approached the desk and introduced herself, explaining that she had arranged a wedding event scheduled for that afternoon. The receptionist listened carefully before checking the computer system behind the desk. After a brief moment, she looked up again and gently explained that no wedding had been scheduled for that day at Silverbrook Estate. Diane stood silently for a moment, certain there must be some kind of mistake. Meanwhile, at Willow Creek Garden, the ceremony chairs were filling with guests while Daniel waited near the front of the wooden aisle beside the officiant. Olivia stepped outside the bridal room and watched the guests gathering beneath the maple trees while soft music drifted through the garden speakers. Inside the preparation room, Emily lifted her wedding dress from its hanger and looked out once more across the lake. Her mother had believed she was orchestrating the perfect surprise for her daughter's wedding day. What Diane Carter had never understood was that the wedding had never needed to be rescued in the first place.